Hey guys, Dave here. In case you can't tell, I'm going to do a shaper project. It's December and I wanted to try to come up with a holiday themed project that I could do with the shaper. And of course, when I started to think about what I could make with a smart router, I thought of greeting cards. Why not? I've got an idea. Don't know if it's going to work. Wish me luck. The first thing I need for making greeting cards is a design. Since I can't draw, I recruited my daughter to do it. While she's working on the drawing, I'll let you all in on the rest of my plan. I want to use Origin to carve wood blocks to use for block printing the cards. I figured, since that's kind of cheating, I'd level up the challenge by making it at least 3 or 4 colors, because I'll have to carve a separate block for each color. I know, still cheating, but I think it's going to be fun. So we're going with this Peace, Love, Snowman design. Even though I'll be using Origin to cut the blocks, I want to keep the line work reasonable. This will be cool though, because I can use Trace to scan her drawing and import it straight onto my Origin. I want to make 4x6 cards, and that'll just fit into Plate's work window.
Okay.
Cool. Oh, looks great. Now I'm ready to scan this into Trace. So far I've had pretty mixed experiences with Trace, so I'm definitely going into this with my fingers crossed. Holy cow, that was too easy. Who'd have thunk? I'm setting up a jig so the blocks for each color will be able to index from a common datum when I'm using them to print. I'm going to make my blocks 5 by 7 inches, so I ripped a piece of poplar 5 inches wide, and I've marked a center line and center point on it. I'll use Plate's center guide to locate it properly and add a couple of alignment fences so I can put it back in the exact same place for each block. That clamp's going to have to go. I don't usually screw or nail to my workbench, but I guess I can live with a couple of 18 gauge brad nail holes. I scanned the drawing into Photoshop to color map it, and after printing it, I'm not going to lie, I was a little tempted to call it done. But, never being one to be influenced by good judgment, I decided to forge ahead. So, turns out I'll need 5 blocks, counting the one for the black outline. I'm ready to load my SVG file onto Origin and center it in Plate's workspace. So I'm looking at this file now and the cuts I'm going to need to make for each block. And I'm thinking how smart it would be to use Inkscape or Studio to separate the vectors for each block and define the cuts. But I kind of hate Inkscape and I don't use Studio. Plus, I really wanted to not add that step to the workflow. So I says to myself, says I, Dave, you're pretty sharp. You can sort the vectors out in your head as you go, I says. So I started cutting. The block I'm starting with is for the drawing's black outline. I'm using a 1/4 inch bit because I figure I'm going to have to remove a lot of material. I don't get far before I realize the 1/4 inch bit is about to eat the snowman's buttons. What makes it even harder is that when Origin is cutting, the only vector that stays on screen is the one I'm following. So I have to check ahead before I start the cut and remember about where stuff is that I don't want to cut through. Then, as I close in on those areas, I need to keep stopping the cut to actually see how close I really am. Unfortunately, this was pretty much a recurring theme through the project. I finally carved out as much of the inside profiles as I could and then took a pass around the outside. I also added a 4x6 rectangle around the perimeter, which just fits inside of Plate's work window and gave me a border to work to for pocketing out the rest of the unneeded material. But again here, I had to be careful not to cut past the previous cut because I can't see the actual vectors on Origin's screen without stopping. After the 1/4 inch bit, I worked my way down through 1/8, 16th, and even 32nd inch bits to get into some of the detail. For someone who usually overthinks and analyzes everything, I sure didn't have much foresight into how complicated my simple little design was going to be. Hopefully, I've at least learned something here. Maybe it's to buy my cards from Target. Alright, I guess this is as good a time as any for a little true confession. I'm going to have to admit that I'm not actually showing you my first attempt at this right now. But surprisingly enough, I didn't screw up keeping the vectors sorted out. Turns out, while I was busy overthinking about all the vectors, I completely forgot about something else, kind of important. So, anybody that's done woodblock printing before, which, by the way, I have not, knows that you need to carve the reverse of the image you want to print on the block. I did know that, but this is how far I got before I remembered it. I kind of expected some of this, but I'd be lying if I told you I didn't have some choice words when I saw it. The good news is that my dust extractor, I guess by the good grace of a hope for world peace, decided to leave these behind for me to find. A couple of drops of Titebond later, I'm ready to get back to cutting the rest of my blocks. The black outline block really was the most intricate one to cut, and I'm glad I got it out of the way first. Also, its thin lines were the most likely to blow out, so I shouldn't have any more problems with that. The rest of the blocks were pretty much lather, rinse, and repeat. I just had to keep enough wits about me to remember which lines belonged to what colors. A quick face sanding gets rid of most of the raised fibers from the upcut bit. Then to the table saw to remove the material that was behind and supporting plate. Some final detailing, and I think these blocks are ready to do some printing. But maybe we have time for a smoothie break first. Well, that's not actually our smoothie blender, but that's my wife Sharon, and she happens to be a hand paper maker. When she has batches of paper pulp that she's processed but not used up for a project, she strains the water and dries the pulp for future use. The blender helps to break up the clumps when she's ready to rehydrate it to use again. So we're getting ready to print our cards on, you guessed it, handmade paper. After discussing how many cards we wanted to make, we decided it might make more sense to use some paper Sharon already had stocked. She mostly had larger sheets, so we needed to do some cutting. But at least I got to share a little bit of her process with you. As I start getting ready for printing, I just want to say one more time that I've never done this before, so please give me some slack and be kind in the comments. We could have initially cut the paper oversized, leaving a margin that could index aligned with the printing blocks. But we wanted to keep as many of the deckled edges as we could. That's what the natural uncut edges of handmade paper are called. I also could have cut the extra margin off of the printing blocks, but in my vast inexperience, a lot of the printed areas would have been too close to the paper edge for trying to lay the paper down accurately. So that leaves this option, which is adding an indexing edge to the paper. I'm using Scotch 2070 Safe Release Painter's Tape to attach the indexing strip. I'm glad I had a roll because it's really the only tape that would release from the paper without lifting some of its fibers. We're starting with a small run to try out the printing process and see how each of the different papers takes the ink. Sharon picked out a sampling and we're starting with about 10 sheets. Okay, here we go. Sharon has done a little block printing before, but not with multiple colors and blocks, so the precise indexing was never a concern. And it has been a minute since it was with our kids when they were little. So our combined experience in this is that plus whatever we learned this morning on YouTube U. I guess what I'm saying is, if it were me, this probably isn't the video I'd watch to learn how to block print, except maybe for a couple of things not to do. Like tip number 1 that I already mentioned. Don't forget to reverse the image you carve into your block. And not wasting any time, I'll go straight to tip number 2. Do not print until you've checked that your block is positioned correctly. Guess maybe it's time to let the boss show me how it's done. Okay, let me see if I've got this straight. I'm supposed to set all the printing blocks facing the same way, right? All right, I think I've got it. After finishing each color, we gave the prints a little time to dry before starting the next one. The red ink we used was the first one that came out of an old tube that Sharon still had from the past. When she first squeezed some out, it definitely seemed a little thicker than the first ones we did. But it rolled out okay, so we figured it would be fine. I guess it printed kind of thick and wasn't dry enough when we tried to start doing the white. This stuff is water-based, so we probably could have mixed in a couple of drops of water to get it to the right consistency. After waiting a while longer, we printed a few more of the whites, but there were some we just had to leave to dry overnight. But hey, it's tip time again. Tip number 3 could be to make sure your ink consistency is good. But I think recognizing that is one of those things that will come with experience. So I'm going to go with don't start printing the next color before the last one is dry. Yeah, that's the one. Anybody figure out tip number 4 yet? Number 4 is, don't forget tip number 2.
Oh, fucked up. I laid it upside down. Darn it.
Eventually, we got them all. Our last print block is the one for the black outline. We've done 4 colors now, and I'm pretty sure we've got this down. Surely we've learned from our mistakes, and I know I'm feeling pretty confident. Let's go. Ah, crud. Now what? For some reason, the black line didn't print very well at a couple of areas around the red heart. We thought maybe we just needed to add more black ink to the block, but even with that, the same thing kept happening. The black happened to be the other tube of old ink we had, so yeah, this sounds familiar, right? We had a new tube, and once we started using that one, things improved, but still not as good as we wanted. After studying the prints more closely, we think, or at least we hoped, that the rest of the problem is from the old red ink laying down too thick and even leaving some small ridges around the edges of the heart. So I think I want to revisit what I mentioned a minute ago about ink consistency and bring it back as tip number 5. Don't try to print with old, thick ink. The good news is that the index system is working great. I'm able to reposition the prints back onto the block for second or even third tries to improve the black outline, although some of them do end up a little wider than I want. All in all, I feel like this project is a win. Was the all-shaper workflow the best choice? Maybe not. It probably would have been a lot less work to use vCarve to separate the vectors into their own files and cut the blocks on my long mill CNC. So let's just say I did this project for all of you shaper users that don't have a CNC.
You take a line and peel the stuff off.
So hey, if you made it this far and enjoyed the video, here's my bonus tip number 6. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe before you leave. As always, thanks for watching. I really do appreciate your support. Happy holidays.